This podcast is part of the Spoon Podcast Network, home of smart conversations that feed your mind.
What if the way we cultivate and fund our global food system could save us all? I'm Eva Goldborn, and welcome to Everything But the Carbon Sink, a podcast that delves into the exciting and sometimes messy intersection of food, climate, and the money that could change everything. I have a real treat today because here with me today is Christine Gould, who wears many, many hats. You are founder and CEO of GIGA, which we'll talk about in a moment, founder of Thought for Food in one of your previous iterations of Self. You're the author of the Changemakers Guide, and you're a fellow Imagine Leader, which is a global leadership community for impact, which me and Chrissy are a part of. And we're going to dive into a lot today, including what happens when venture capital is deployed with actual vision, intention, and focus on trying to scale these science and tech-based solutions. So I'm really excited for this conversation, and thanks for being with me today, Chrissy.
Oh, it's such a pleasure, Ava. Thank you so much for having me. And I'm really excited for this conversation about something I'm so passionate about and really think can be addressed and make a difference into our food system.
Thank you. And also you're a proper expert in this space too. So I want to jump right in with you. I want to start with GIGA, which is your new venture, and not only what this platform is and how it functions, but you've been in the food and ag tech investing space for a long period of time. And so I want to also explore with you the evolution of your thinking and observations in this space to sort of land you on this thesis with GIGA.
Yeah, that sounds great. I'll give you the quick and dirty kind of summary of like my career and observations in the space, which have led me to this point. I actually grew up on a farm in the Midwest of the United States, and that instilled in me a real passion, of course, for agriculture. But interestingly, my father was a scientist for the U.S. Department of Agriculture. So every Sunday as a family, we would take nature walks and we would, walk through the cornfields and the soy fields that were on our farm and around us. And my dad would explain to me that these crops were so much more than just food. They were also fuel. They were bioplastics. They were soil microbiomes. They were, kind of all of this potential. And so I always had this lens from a very young age of our agriculture and food systems being, filled with innovation potential, right? Like I looked at every crop, like what can we do with this? What can we create with this? And that led me, to a career in the industry. After grad school, I actually joined one of the world's largest agribusiness corporations based here in Switzerland, where I live. And it was an amazing experience to get an insight into how these big behemoth, organizations think about innovation. I was starry-eyed, right? I came in and I was like, I'm going to bring my next gen passion for openness and collaboration and, build open source models and like disruptive innovation and make it happen. But I realized very quickly how resistant to change the industry is and how many of the leaders were not seeing all of the potential I was seeing, in our food system.
Yeah.
So I was, intrigued, traveling the world, visiting farms, going to UN meetings and policy meetings and hearing this question of like, how are we going to feed 10 billion people by 2050? And I would look in the room and realize we were answering that question with the same answers I had been hearing year after year, not really creative thinking. And also a lot of the people who were in the room were people who weren't even going to be alive in 2050, right? So they didn't really have skin in the game. And so with that, I had this idea together with some friends. We were like, what if we could bring a new generation of creative thinkers and innovators into this sector? We could apply their like entrepreneurial mindset and, build these kind of new solutions that we're so hungry for. And so that's where Thought for Food came to life. And Thought for Food was really the pioneer. We were the first ones in the world to bring startup culture and innovation challenges into the entrenched, food and ag system.
Yeah,
and
hugely innovative.
Yeah, it blew my mind. Like we really exceeded expectations. We were seeing like hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands of people enter every year and bringing these really exciting innovations, right? And so, and we were connecting them to investment and to partnerships wherever possible. I ended up leaving my job after 10 years at Syngenta. I incubated Thought for Food while I was at Syngenta, which is the agribusiness I work for. And then I ended up leaving Syngenta. There's actually fascinatingly a case study that's used in Harvard Business School about my decision to leave with the idea of like, Yeah, it's kind of random, but it's like, let's bring on more corporate partners and like scale like what we've been doing here. And also like de-risk, because it was starting to look like Thought for Food was like just feeding into, Syngenta, and actually the solutions we were seeing could serve the industry more broadly. So Thought for Food became an independent nonprofit organization, and we were like, accelerating hundreds of solutions with a really fit for purpose startup accelerator and seeing successes, right? We had actually many of our startups go on to raise significant capital, hundreds of millions of dollars, to form partnerships with leaders in the industry. And we were looking at our nonprofit business model and kind of saying, wait, maybe there's like something more sustainable to look at here.
Yeah.
And yeah, that was kind of the time when I was a couple of years ago thinking about like the future of Thought for Food and what to do. And this vision for GIGA came to life. But funnily enough, that was also a time when kind of the whole investment hype cycle was plateauing, and not just plateauing, was falling off the cliff, right? So we saw a heyday of investments in 2020, 2021. It was like the time. It was so exciting to be in the sector and to see all of the track record that we had built, like kind of paying off. But suddenly the funding landscape became bleak. And we were having a hard time like funding our nonprofit, and we were looking to this new model, but actually the whole VC landscape was drying up and it was turning into this so-called funding winter. And that's when I sat down and I did some deep thinking and said, actually, does the world need more innovation, or do we actually need these innovations to have pathways to scale? And that's where the idea of GIGA came in, because I was seeing these incredible solutions launched by passionate, driven people who really understand the local needs of their food system. Because we were working, by the way, with innovators in 180 countries. Like, that was crazy to me. We built this like digital platform to help them collaborate with each other. And unfortunately, they just couldn't get the funding because of this funding winter, because they were too early stage, too risky for the industry to place a bet on. Didn't know what to do with early stage innovation.
Never the right perfect profile.
Never the right profile. And it started to feel like innovation theater. Like we were doing these kind of like startup competitions, handing out a check, and then just like watching these startups die a death by 1,000 cuts, instead of actually getting them to the point where they could make the dent that they were capable of. So that's where GIGA came in. We said, we need to rebuild this like scaling infrastructure. It's of course about capital deployment, but we need to educate investors about how to make smart bets in this space, what really is a good team and a good technology. We need to get corporate partners to learn how to work with early stage innovation and really move out of pilot purgatory, as I call it, like startups constantly like treading water, going nowhere. And we need to give startups who are cash strapped infrastructure that they can have to be strategic and do what they need to do. Often they're technical founders. They know their science and tech, but they don't know how to talk to investors. They don't know how to build a data room. They don't know how to deal with corporate milestones. And so we kind of were like, we're going to take on all of those fronts, an ecosystem approach, and layered on top of that, we're going to work on the policy front too, because policy is a critical enabler and regulation for these solutions to take off. Thus the GIGA model. It was moving from innovation theater. Well, it was moving from true innovation, nurturing and incubating innovation, that turned into innovation theater, into actually scaling and making a difference. So
and again, thank you for that, and just speaks to your evolution in the space as well. And I want to hear, in terms of GIGA, that evolution, and sounds like pivot from Thought for Food. What is GIGA a services consultancy? Is it a platform, a hub? How are you thinking about that? Because even not only in identifying financing pathways for these actual solutions, a lot of intermediaries and a lot of sort of that connective tissue of experts like you also need to be thinking about their business models in this space. So I just want to hear a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, it's all of the above. We're services, we're a hub, we're a platform. And funnily enough, like when that funding winter hit, it wasn't just affecting the startups. Actually, the big industry took a hit too. So we saw an exodus of leadership and executive teams from those incumbent organizations. It's kind of cyclical how food and ag works. And I think it tends to go in like 8-year cycles, but we hit like this point where it was like there was no capital in the market from VC or, public markets. And you were seeing also the corporates doing, kind of layoffs or people leaving, because they were frustrated that it couldn't move their initiatives forward. But that was a prime time for me to say, let me curate these industry experts who bring experience, but don't necessarily want to go join a startup, because it's like a lot of energy and effort.
Yeah.
But what we can
and a huge appetite for risk, which not everybody is in the mood for.
Exactly. And so we were like, what if we could be this hub, this platform to like unite all of these industry experts that we match make to the needs of the startups, right? For what is called fractional support. I don't know if you've heard that word, but it's like a fraction of the cost, a fraction of the time. So you essentially don't pay for a full-time talent, but you get the expertise of someone who really knows what they're doing, which is a great enabler for a startup success and growth trajectory.
Yeah.
So this fractional support was our startup service. And the same thing, we're advising investors. We're actually also, like I said, making open innovation work for corporations. So we're managing large scale pilot projects all over the world to move those into scale up, and commercial integration. And again, just having at my fingertips all of these amazing people that I can pull in as needed into this GIGA scale model. And that's kind of the idea, is like, we play so small in food and ag. We are incremental with the types of funds we deploy. People are, trying to take this like step-by-step approach. And it's like, actually, let's bring together people from all over the world. Let's, work in this creative way and create this hub and spoke model that can allow new things to happen. And, in a cost-effective and efficient way. And that's what we've built. And it's paying off, like we have at our fingertips, because a lot of us have worked in the corporate side and big investment houses and more. We have relationships at a click of a button. So a startup doesn't have to go from scratch, like building their funnel and their pipeline to do their go to market. It's like, we know what to do. We can bring these insights that just accelerate. I was riding bikes with my kid this weekend. And it's funny, like, you never forget how to ride a bike, but my son did. He's 9.
How long has he been off that bike?
Yeah, we had to retrain him. But one of the things we were talking to him about was like the gear shifts, right? And like how on certain gears you push harder, but you go farther, right? And so this is a little bit like, it was reminding me as we were riding bikes, I was like, this is what GIGA is. Like, it's like for the same push, you get more momentum. And that's what we're trying to bring into the system.
That's such a helpful visual, and sort of helps articulate the value of GIGA and you in this space. Because I think the other question that I have also is, what you're saying, it's like, oh my gosh, this makes total sense. Like, GIGA, like, why aren't there 100 gigas, or, like, why hasn't GIGA taken over the world? And even in your description of fractional, it's like, we have fractional CMOs, we have fractional CFOs, we have fractional every other role. Why not some of this, additional support, where again, it's like, sometimes you can't connect the risk appetite of the expert who you'd love to have on your team with, affordability, and also, just all the different components. I'm curious though. Oh, yeah. Go ahead.
The difference is too, because you're right, like the fractional CFO, CTO, CMO model has taken off across all kinds of like startup sectors. But I think the difference is we really have that food and ag expertise, which you need specifically in this space. This is a sector.
Those relationships, like you were saying.
Relationships, exactly. It just requires a unique approach compared to it does, you need those relationships. You need to understand biological systems. You need to understand the fragmented industry, how farmers think, how the supply chain thinks to make it work. So it really is important to have these like veterans, from the industry come in and not be encumbered by their legacy thinking. Like, they have a lot of fun. The people I'm bringing and matching, like, they're refreshed and reminded like how fun this sector is actually when you make innovation meet experience.
And not getting stonewalled, it sounds like, by
the corporate inertia.
that is real. I'm curious too, how I want to talk sort of the supply and demand of the work that you do too, because it's like you've got your amazing innovators and tech, the solution providers on one side, you're educating these different partners and investors on the other side. How difficult or easy is it to sell what you're doing and the like, do people even recognize the deficit in their sort of understanding in this space and therefore understand the value that you're bringing in, sort of like, again, that very nuanced and strategic connective tissue that you offer? Or like, how much friction do you see in that?
Yeah, that is such an astute question, Ava. And it's actually something that some other people have asked me and I've been doing a lot of thinking about. Like, so for me, I think as an industry, we're very good at problem solving and not good at opportunity chasing. And, there is a $12 trillion economic upside by pursuing food systems transformation, right? It's ripe for the taking. But I think the way most of the people with money think about what to do when it comes to food systems is like, if we take corporate innovation, which I know well, having spent a decade in one of them, leading innovation programs, is like open innovation is like an R&D team has a specific, need, and then they want to like plug and play a solution in to solve that need. And so they're not thinking about this kind of, I mentioned it at the beginning of our call, this disrupt or be disrupted concept. Like, what are those adjacent, business model or technology opportunities that we could be looking at? Or even more exciting, the disruptive growth opportunities that are in this quadrant over here that we're not looking at because it's out of our P&L responsibility, yes,
the proverbial, we don't have budget for that.
Right. Exactly. So you're right. Like that has been a big challenge in this model, because a lot of this stuff, it takes a lens of seeing the opportunity and seeing this is worth investing in. So what we're trying to do too is move beyond that plug and play model to say, how can we actually build value through integrating pieces of the puzzle that often exist in startups into, integrated solutions that offer higher value propositions. So we're working on a project right now with a partner in the ingredients supply chain around fresh produce on exactly this approach, right? And so it's kind of like, you have to find the right partners who, can see beyond the short-termism.
Yeah.
And then another message that is resonating is around future-proofing the industry. So the companies are in an existential, let's take ag. So I mentioned just now, like the food ingredient supply chain, right? So they're looking at collaborating around procurement of regenerative ingredients, right? That helps them all. And so it's kind of this pre-competitive collaboration opportunity where they all benefit. Even though they are in some ways competing, but they all benefit by working with startups that can turbocharge their sustainability and profitability on the farms. Yeah. We're also working in the space of biological crop inputs, which is transformational for the ag input industry, right? But they're in an existential crisis, like, because regulatory pressure is putting traditional synthetic chemistry, under the lens of major scrutiny. You have litigation from, consumers in key markets around the world. And on top of it, you have, products that are losing efficacy because of resistance issues. They've been overused, et cetera. So there is an innovation crisis around what the future of ag inputs, fungicides, crop protection products, biocontrols, now we're entering a space too, where we have things called biostimulants that can help crops, grow by stimulating the soil. And, it's very exciting. And so this is the message we bring into some of those companies, is this is like future-proofing your business. It's expanding your portfolio of options. And, we help vet the technologies and the startups so that matchmaking can be done more effectively. Same with investors. This is another insight I think is important to share. The big companies who dominate so much of our food system, and hold so much control about what innovation, they're like gatekeepers of innovation, right?
Yeah.
So we need to convince them about the value proposition for investing in innovation. But guess what? They're also advising the big VC firms. So they're playing a role too in like the decisions that VCs make about what to invest in. So they don't have a big incentive to advise VCs to invest in something that will fundamentally disrupt their core business.
Yeah.
So
And be in
that's
competition to their business model.
voila. So that's a problem with ag when we have so much power concentration, right, in the incumbent companies, and we have fresh innovation over here. And then the investment world is getting influenced by the thinking of the people who really are the scale up partners, right? Like they're the ones that own distribution channels, access to farmers, processing,
Yeah.
CapEx, etc. It's really like it is a challenge. And that's why, again, GIGA, I always say it's a mission and a mindset. So we have the challenge of like convincing people, right, that they need to work with us in this opportunity chasing type of paradigm.
Yeah.
It's also to think big. Like GIGA is like, it's a mindset. It's like, let's stop playing small. Let's go after big opportunities. Let's put real money behind it. Let's make things happen and shake it up. Like the food system deserves that right now. And this
And needs it.
who's it working for? Only the big companies, I guess.
Yeah. And in some ways, and I want to explore that a little bit too, almost like the stakeholders in the financing supply chain specifically, because, we're for the purposes of simplicity, talking about these incumbents, these large agribusinesses that in some ways that feels like a strength in this space, in that technically, because everybody is so consolidated, if we can, and of course the challenge is to move these monoliths is much more difficult, but we know who those players are as those agribusinesses. They're not fragmented. But then on the other side, talking about investment, particularly, we're talking about VC. But one thing that I've noticed and sort of learned in this space, especially now being a venture partner at a fund focused on ag labor, so on the production side, but on the human side, is VC doesn't seem to be suited well at all for a lot of components and solutions within ag. I mean, the ones that you described are obviously make total sense. We're thinking about like, application of AI, robotics, the, biologicals, like you were saying. It's like, okay, those make a lot of sense, but those are not the only innovations that happen in this space, nor need to happen. Who else needs to be at the table in terms of financing this? And is it just a matter of bringing VCs along where it's like your usual spreadsheet and model that you use for, that SaaS platform, or that like tractor sensor? That's great, but that just doesn't work anymore. Or is it like, see you later, bye, we need to be reimagining these different capital stacks with others?
Oh, the latter. Like, I love the way you phrase that. Let's like, see you later. Let's reimagine the capital stack and let's get creative.
By VCs. See ya.
By VCs. But I told you, we've had this funding winter, right, over the past years, which was a wake up call to the industry on the whole. In that moment, I mean, the positive side, despite, many promising startups dying death by 1,000 cuts, many corporations losing talent, I think one of the things that came out of that was, the survival of the fittest, right? And I think what we're seeing is that there's a recalibration in the market of like more realistic valuations, and also the awakening that this hockey stick trajectory that you can chase in many other verticals is really hard to get in agriculture and food. And therefore the VC model maybe isn't, I mean, it's fine maybe for some specific technology spaces, but for most, it's not fit for purpose. And so we're seeing that survival of the fittest, not just in terms of the startups, but really in terms of the funds that are left. And everybody's waking up and thinking like, what is the right approach here? And so who's stepping in? Well, interestingly, private equity is kind of stepping in the space. And I think there's some really interesting plays here because they're, thinking differently, bringing operational oversight to companies that often very much need it, can also play this aggregation and integration role. We're also seeing vertical integration. I was talking to a private equity firm And they're like buying land, right? And they're doing
Yeah.
everything from selecting the seed varieties through to, processing and developing consumer products that
Wow.
it's like the whole value chain and
That
compass thing.
feels unusual.
It is, exactly. But it's kind of an interesting model because you're thinking to yourself, like, private equity is very driven by profitability, right? And what's an enabler for profitability? Innovation, right? That can help you with the right smart bets, help you achieve efficiency and sustainability goals, And so those are some conversations we're having right now. The role of corporate venture capital, which is like, another space where corporations they have their open innovation spaces and their
Yeah. And
business.
everybody has a venture arm.
And they have their venture arm, but those have been suffering of late, particularly in ag, and they're looking differently at the space. And our advice to startups is kind of, and we just did like an insights webinar for some of our startups on this, and it's like, be picky about the CVCs. It used to be you wanted to go work with a corporate venture capital firm to get their name, on your.
It seems like so tempting and like the ultimate, sort of badge of credibility.
But now it's like, what are they going to provide you? Are they actually
Yeah.
going to enable your technology to be deployed? Are they providing distribution channels? Are they providing manufacturing? Whatever you need, so be a little picky on this. And there's been a couple of big ones that have, announced shutdowns lately. So it's just an interesting time, and we're going to see what comes up. But it's actually something, I'm not really like prepared to talk fully about this now, but I'm actively working on this with some really interesting people about how to get into the investment game ourselves. So stay tuned for more on that. But I mean, you can deduce a lot from what I'm posting, but I really think that, one, an ecosystem approach is needed. Two, I think there's a lot of opportunity in emerging markets. We're seeing this kind of like leapfrog potential in places that don't have legacy systems built in, and they have high entrepreneurial talent. And I think that there is kind of this really neat new model where you could think about, offering more expertise and operational support in your investment portfolio to ensure those companies can make it. Because I think a lot of the VC world has put money in and like let the companies, go.
Like write a check and then,
Yeah, exactly.
We'll come back for our returns and,
So I think there's some
18 months.
opportunities. Yeah.
Yeah, good. And it, certainly validates for me to what I'm observing in this space and what I also, believe needs to be happening in this space, where it's like the food system is so nuanced and complex. The financial tools that we're using also need to sort of reflect that. And also, and maybe this is sacrilege for you to hear me say this, but, there's this over leveraging and featuring of technology solutions. Not that there's anything wrong, of course, with science-based and technology solutions, but again, there's so many other components in terms of, services that need to be required and things that, again, just sort of don't fit into that framework. And so I'm curious also from your perspective, sort of looking on the innovator side, do you, in terms of sort of like the hot spots of innovation, do you see ever these pockets of, oversaturation of solution providers where you're like, oh man, if I see like another, robotic arm that's going to pick strawberries, I'm going to like lose my mind, or like how many times, this sensor, that sensor for the same exact, fertilization process. What are, or is it across the board and sort of very varied? Where is those patterns and pockets, if they're there?
Yeah, I mean, such a great, fascinating question. Again, one that keeps me up at night and keeps me thinking. So technology for technology's sake is something that really bothers me. And I think that's also what we've seen with a lot of misplaced capital and, attention in this sector. Yeah. And actually,
that's something that like legitimately worries me around that too, where it's like the only thing that can catch attention of investment.
Exactly. And so we've come up with a modality called the GIGA readiness level, which funnily enough is GRL, girl. And go girl. But the GIGA readiness level was like an attempt that we had. So when I was at Thought for Food, and I cover this in my book, we discovered I should say. It just became our lens with how we were looking at solutions. It was called multispectral thinking, right? So, and multispectral thinking was like looking beyond, science and tech utopia or a return to the past, which is like so often how the narratives of like what food systems can look like. It's either like sci-fi, everything, weird pill food, or trad wives. We're all going to be like, homesteading and cooking all day, and that
Well, I
model.
don't
And
mind that
like,
so much either, but yeah, it's very binary, which is.
But there's a lot of this binary thinking, and it was like what we were seeing with Thought for Food in our community of passionate change makers was like actually like how can technology be in service of society, in service of the environment, and how do we like actually also carve out a new social license to operate that's inclusive of vulnerable populations, of smallholder farmers, of indigenous peoples, et cetera, right? And so then it's like moving beyond the binary into technology and science in service of our planet and people, right?
Yeah.
And that's what we called multispectral thinking. It's actually based on a multispectral camera and like seeing the world through this rich palette of opportunity. But we brought that into the GIGA readiness level. And the GIGA readiness level, like so often when we're evaluating investability of teams, we look at two things: technology readiness level, like is the technology, which stage gate is it at? And investment readiness level, which is very, in my opinion, superficial. It's like, is there a good business model, a good go-to-market strategy? Where did the team go to school, et cetera? But the GIGA readiness level looks at that underlayer of investment potential. Many people would call it soft skills. I don't love that, but it's looking at like, what's this team and culture? Do they really have like what it takes to build and grow and deploy a startup in the world? What's their collaboration potential, right? Like, are they thinking about how they can work with partners, with the ecosystem, with the value chain, with policy, et cetera? And then also are they thinking about license to operate? Are they thinking about putting their technology in service of people on the planet? And are they differentiating themselves with that? Are they not just doing storytelling because, it helps them market, but doing storytelling because it wins over hearts and minds and people understand what is the vision and purpose of this company. So these aspects help us decide which innovation teams we want to work with and which ones are going to hit it. And they provide a new metric. We're seeing if there's appetite in the investment world. We're doing more and more GIGA readiness level assessments and workshops. But, hopefully we can use that as another data point for investors and corporate leaders to make their decisions around, so that we're not just investing in, I'm sorry, but the stereotypical tech bro with a story that actually is not creating impact, right, at scale, because ultimately that's what we need to do. And we're not here also to just make raising around the story that we should be pursuing.
It's
a
means to an end.
Exactly.
It's not the end.
It's not the end. I think that hype is like endemic into the startup culture, and we need to shift that. So
yeah. And it's like, on one hand, it makes total sense because when you're fundraising, it's like you can't not focus on it. But at the same time, it's not the core part of the, ultimately what needs to happen. I'm curious, and thank you for sharing that about the girl model, the GIGA readiness. Do you do the same thing on the other side for investors? And should you?
So I haven't done it, but somebody in my network has done it. They have like a trust level barometer for investors. So they're trying to create like more transparency around the VCs who there's horror stories, right, of people being led on and sharing, confidential data with investors, and they go. So I think that is an interesting thing. We haven't yet done that, but we are piloting the GIGA readiness level with corporates, and that's also something that we think can be a leadership tool, because they talk a big game around innovation. But are you really ready to go GIGA? Are you brave enough? Do you have the culture and the leadership potential? And are you really willing to do what innovation truly is? That's where a GIGA readiness level score could come out. And we're thinking creatively about that and how to bring that to life for corporate leaders.
I love that, and steal my idea for your investor version of that too, because and I love hearing that, you're doing the corporate component of it and sort of challenging these incumbents to come to the table prepared, where like, similar in, how farmers are the price takers and not the price makers, the innovators and solution providers are, also quite disempowered in this space too, in terms of, the investment takers when it's
Yeah.
attractive to the investors. And even, aside from investment on the partnership side too. So thinking about that education component too, for challenging, these corporates, as you're saying, like, are you really ready for, can you handle the heat in this kitchen?
In
Which
this everything but the kitchen, everything but the
exactly. Oh, there we go. Yeah. Tying it right to the podcast name. And that's one thing that I'm curious about too, is again, like everything that you're saying makes total sense. And in terms of, we've got billions, maybe trillions, in dollars in this space. We do have these incumbents, like General Mills, Syngenta, JBS, everybody does have a public commitment around this work. And even if they don't, it is, as you're saying, like a requirement to future proof our food system, like, cacao oil, or sorry, cacao, palm oil, coffee, a lot of, these high value crops are legitimately going to go by the, the way of the dodo bird if they don't do something, like they will go extinct. And, chocolate may be something that we just, tell our grandkids about. And, which is, it sounds a bit extreme, but at the same time, these companies technically, they are watching this space. They are invested long-term in these supply chains. Yet, why the hell is it so hard then for them to integrate these innovative solutions or invest in them, sort of whatever the modality is? It seems like everybody's at the table. Everybody knows what we're up against. Why is it so damn hard?
Well, I think this is something, that this is bringing it back to what you mentioned at the outset, how we're both imagined leaders. What I find like so compelling about this community led by, Paul Pullman and Valerie Keller, but like with Paul Pullman, what he did was step up as a leader, a corporate leader, and said, I'm going to do the hard thing because it's the right thing. How do we find more leaders like that? How do we like build, I believe inherently that human beings are driven to be good. I mean, we have a few examples where that's not the case, but by the whole, I think that that's what drives. But I especially think in our sector, and I remember that distinctly, like it was, Syngenta gets a lot of hate in the world, but like one of the beautiful things I loved about working there for a decade was the people I met were so intrinsically motivated by agriculture, right? And like, and helping farmers, helping the world, etc. Somehow it gets beat out of us, whether that's in our education and MBA trainings or in the incentives that somehow get pressed upon us in, our business lives, that we forget what the purpose of this is. And I think like, that's where GIGA readiness level, that's where it does take a little bit of like bravery and self-reflection to say, am I going to be brave enough to step up and do the right thing for our food system, for the legacy? And by the way, it's also a whole lot of fun. Like it's like I said, when I bring these corporate experienced leaders to work with startups, they're reignited. They're like, this is like why I joined this industry. This is so fun. You're like shaping and molding what the future potential could be. And don't you want to live in a world of possibility versus a world of finding a no, which is what so many people are trained to do in their professional lives? No, that'll never work. No, I'm not going to do that. No. And it's like, it's just like reminding people that this is fun and delivers value, tangible value, right? And so I got a little glimpse of this when I was at Syngenta. We did this game-changing initiative to open source our patented traits in plant breeding, which these were our golden nuggets. They were our assets. We were hit by all of the business leaders saying, why would you give away, proprietary assets that we've invested hundreds of millions of dollars into developing? Why would you set this up? When we launched our platform, which I cover in the book. And, it's a really interesting case study. Like, we started to get more licensing deals from competitors. We started to gain so much reputational advantage in the world. We built so much trust and goodwill that it propelled our business in a way, even our business leaders were like, we never expected this.
Yeah.
So it's like, if you just try and you say, as a company leader, as a business leader, or an investor, I'm going to take a bet. I'm going to give it my all. I'm going to nurture and develop, because I believe in the potential trajectory of this company, of this set of solutions for the future food system. It will pay off and you will feel so good, and that is motivating. That's for me, what human beings are meant to do in this world, is to
and we lose it sometimes. In those, in that ecosystem where you're saying the incentives can sometimes be very against that. But also what you're saying too is demonstrated value in thinking differently. It's not a nice to have. It's not sort of, we hope that this will be, a cost saver or, a profit builder, but actually, creating more business deals and more credibility in the space, which I would argue too is one of the most difficult things to acquire as a business. You can have a great marketing strategy, you can have, awesome C-suite and great investors, but that trust building, it makes a huge difference. I want to ask maybe 1.5 more questions as we sort of land this conversation, even though there's a million directions that I want to go. I want to sort of quickly address, we've talked a lot about sort of the bookends of this innovation supply chain, if you will, the solution providers and investors. But one of the things that I'm always surprised by, or at least is a theme in what I hear, is, those are almost the two easiest things in terms of identify the problem, create the solution, get the series, A, B, C, whatever. And of course it's not easy, but it's actually, people are, I'm sure, has Eva, does she actually know what this takes? But what I mean is it's the adoption, and it's also the identifying the customer and being able to acquire the customer. Because one thing, and tell me if I'm right or wrong on that, because what I'm surprised by too is these solutions. Okay, we're talking about, on the production side, again, as if it's a monolith. It's well, how many times was that stalk of broccoli touched, and how many people or organizations, entities own it at different moments? So who's my customer if, it's a, shelf life extension, technology, or, even around seeds where it's oh, obviously I just need to sell to the person who puts the seed in the ground. It's there's 10 other stakeholders within that. So how do you help, or how do you even see, supporting these solution providers on that part that often is sort of accidentally becomes an afterthought? I mean, of course, everybody, thinks about their customer strategy, but it seems to be a lot more jarring to them when they actually get started on that and are oh shit, who are we selling to? How do you look at that?
Yeah, I mean, again, gosh, you are asking the right questions and the tough questions. And that's why in our model, having the experience combined with the creativity and passion allows us to navigate what is a very complex and fragmented space. And so the stuff you touched upon, product market fit, go-to-market strategy, in many other sectors, it's quite linear, right? You kind of know, in this segment, these are, but like you said, the value proposition can be vast or non-existent for certain players, in the space. And so you have to really, in my opinion, test, fail, learn, share, repeat, this kind of iterative cycle, which is so hard in this entrenched industry to do. But I mean, one example as you were talking just comes to mind, and it's a system developed by an entrepreneur originally from Morocco. And she developed kind of a cold storage system that could be deployed on farms. And it has a patented cooling technology that is very differentiated. And, who pays for that? The farmers don't have a lot of money to pay, even though they can get value from storing their crops in a cold storage before, and then they can optimize when they take it to market. But then there's like a whole logistics side to this. Can they even get it picked up at the right time? And then there's, this whole thing about like they don't have money, but maybe the retailer cares because then they can secure their supply chain and optimize all this. So these were conversations that we just had to experiment with and talk to different providers. And there was no clear-cut answer, right? We thought it was one thing. But then in talking to the market, it was like, that's not the value proposition. Actually, this is the value proposition. We need to talk to this value addition player, actually, who can bring another missing piece of the puzzle to create bigger value. So the cold storage system isn't just on its own as a cooling, technology. So these are the kinds of creative interventions that GIGA brings to life. And I mentioned, and we haven't gone deep into that, but that's why we're in the government and policy space. So one of the interesting angles that we're working on in GIGA in different markets, we're not funded necessarily by the government, but they're providing market access to our companies. And this is particularly the case of these emerging markets that want to leapfrog. They're saying, we want to actually produce locally, nourish our country's people instead of just serving cheap commodity markets with raw materials, right? And so help us do that.
Exporting all of these delicious, nutritious things that we send to Europe and the US. And, my country is suffering from, food insecurity.
Exactly. So they're carving out pathways. They're saying innovation can be a great intervention for us to help achieve our food security goals, which national food security goals have been on the rise since COVID, since Russia, Ukraine, and now with tariffs, right? More countries are saying like, we want to not depend on global supply chains. Help us do that, GIGA. We want innovation that, we can then develop market access pathways with our farmers and our local ecosystem. So that's been a really exciting frontier for GIGA to get involved too. So we're like curating best in class technologies, we're helping localize it, and we're bringing that to life in, addressing food security strategies for countries. So I think like that is a great market access opportunity for startups, in a world where they're looking for customers. So yeah.
Yeah, it's a great example. And I think sort of a reassuring one too, as we're thinking about like the systems level solutions that we need in this space, which are not easy. Final question as we close out this conversation, even though we didn't even get into like more around the adoption side and on the consumer side. But now I've started asking all my guests this because the space is so messy and imperfect. What is the ugly baby for you in this work? Either within the work that you do specifically within GIGA, or in this space where it's like an ugly truth that exists and is here and needs to be either dealt with, or sort of something needs to happen. But what is the ugly baby for you in this work?
I think
knowing that every baby is beautiful.
Every baby is beautiful. And I know, I read the backstory of Littlefoot, and I know you have the beautifulest little babies in their little feet. But I think, and I have my babies too, and thinking about that legacy. But I think the ugly baby is, I just think this industry, I get asked this all the time. They're like, gosh, if it's so hard, Christine, why do you stay in this industry? Because I do think we have a lot of people who are just, it's an age-old industry. Agriculture has the word culture in it, right? Culture is notoriously deep-rooted and hard to change, right? We're dealing with people, it's ideological, it's religious, it's like we're up against, and how do you change all of this, right? And how do you, I feel like in every other sector, people's minds are open to possibilities and change, but agriculture, it's very confronting, it's very jarring. And so that to me is the ugly baby, is like, I sometimes just don't know if our industry has the right mindset to do what we need to do and what I think we are capable of doing. So it's, a lot of my job is, like I said, it's kind of inspiring people, call it fluffy, but it's like, let's try this. It can pay off. We're going to do great things along the way. Like we tell us, I actually built like an enabling platform in GIGA called GIGA Studios, which is just sharing the stories in an energizing, fun, motivating way, because there's so much doom and gloom, and people love to lay in that and then go into this binary thinking. And where is that taking us? So it's, I get jealous.
Couch.
It's a therapist couch. I get jealous when I talk to my friends working in other spaces, and I'm just like, wow, the energy and the money and the try hard spirit. Like, how do I bring that in here? We need like to inject a bit more. And so I think community storytelling, amplification, bringing fun. Like, I love you. You're great at that, Ava. Like, even the name of your podcast and, just like the stuff that you bring your spirit into this. We need more of that. In my
Thank
opinion.
you. And yeah, I do selfishly too, because it's just more entertaining for myself that way.
Yeah.
And, to be like one persona in this work and then a different persona at the kitchen table. I'm not smart enough to be able to sort of, keep those worlds separate. And, so you and I do share that value too of, that authenticity and leading with, relationships first in this space. Yeah. Christine, thank you so much for an amazing conversation. And yeah, I'm obviously like so energized by this, by what we've discussed. And I want to thank our listeners for joining me for everything but the carbon sink on the Spoon Network. I hope this discussion inspires you to think differently about the role we all play in transforming our food system. And if you've enjoyed today's conversation, don't forget to subscribe wherever you listen to your podcasts and share it with others who also care about building a sustainable food future. So see you next time. And Christine, thank you again so much.
Thank you.